Jonathan Graves stood in his sleek, modern office, staring at the phone in his hand, paralyzed. The call had come in like a tidal wave, pulling everything he had worked for into chaos. "We're on the verge of losing it all," the voice on the other end had said, blunt and cold. His fingers gripped the desk as his mind raced. Just yesterday, things had seemed manageable. Today, his business empire was crumbling under the weight of crippling debts, a damaging scandal, and worst of all, betrayal. He couldn't shake the sinking feeling that the world he had built was slipping through his fingers. "We can fix this," Jonathan muttered to himself, his voice barely above a whisper. But deep down, he feared that no amount of work could repair what had already been broken. His phone buzzed again, and as he picked it up he realized that no matter what, he was about to face the most challenging decision of his life. Jonathan leaned against the door, his heart pounding in his chest. The moment he made that call to Mark Richards, he knew things would never be the same. "I can't let this collapse," he muttered to himself. The sinking feeling remained, but now it was joined by a fierce resolve. The business he had built from the ground up, the sacrifices, the late nights, they all flashed before his eyes. But as Claire Simmons, 32, walked into his office, he knew he wasn't alone. "We'll figure this out, Jonathan," Claire said, her calm voice cutting through his panic. She was the only one who truly understood the stakes, and though her words were comforting, Jonathan could sense the doubt behind them. They had both seen the signs for months, but had chosen to push forward. Now, the price of their optimism was staring them in the face. Jonathan, feeling the weight of Claire's presence, slowly stood up from his desk. He looked at her, his eyes heavy with the burden of the situation. "I don't know what to do anymore," he confessed, his voice raw. Claire stepped closer, her eyes soft but firm, trying to offer some reassurance. "We've been through worse," she said quietly, yet Jonathan could see the hesitation in her eyes. The betrayal from Alex Carter, the mounting debts, the public scrutiny, it all felt like a collapsing house of cards. Jonathan ran his hand through his hair, taking in a deep breath. "We built this from nothing," he continued. "I can't just let it go like this." But the doubt was creeping in, the ever-present fear of failure gnawing at him. Claire placed a hand on his shoulder, her voice gentle but strong. "We have a choice, Jonathan. It's not over yet." But was it enough? Jonathan wasn't so sure anymore. As the conversation with Claire lingered, Jonathan's mind raced. There had to be a solution. He couldn't simply give up now. But Claire's quiet words from earlier echoed in his head. "We have a choice, Jonathan." Was it too late for redemption? Just then, the door to his office swung open with urgency, and in walked Eva Johnson, 50, Jonathan's moral compass and an advisor he trusted implicitly. "Jonathan, Claire, we need to talk," Eva said, cutting straight to the point. Eva had been through the highs and lows of the business world, and her experience showed in the no-nonsense tone of her voice. Jonathan turned to face her, meeting her gaze, searching for any sign of hope. "I think I have a way forward, but it will cost us," Eva said. Jonathan's heart skipped a beat. Every decision now felt like a gamble, but maybe, just maybe, this was the lifeline they needed. The three of them sat in a tight circle, the weight of their decisions hanging over the room. Eva explained the plan: a high-risk investment, a pivot in business strategy, and an appeal to the one investor who might save them, Mark Richards, 45. It was a gamble that could either save their company or destroy it entirely. Jonathan listened intently, his mind whirring with possibilities. "It's a chance we have to take," Eva said, looking at Jonathan. "If we don't do something drastic now, we'll have nothing left to fight for." Jonathan nodded slowly. He knew she was right, but the fear of failure was suffocating. Claire, who had been quiet until now, spoke up, her voice steady. "Jonathan, you've built this from the ground up. This isn't the end. We'll do this together." The weight of the decision settled into Jonathan's chest, but something in his gut told him that this was his last shot. Jonathan sat at his desk, staring at the latest financial reports on his laptop. The numbers were overwhelming, each one a painful reminder of how far things had spiraled out of control. Despite the ambitious plan, they were still bleeding money. His phone buzzed on the desk. It was Mark Richards, the investor, again. Jonathan had been dodging his calls, trying to figure out how to get ahead of this crisis. The last conversation had been tense. Mark was pushing for answers, and Jonathan had nothing to give him. With a deep breath, Jonathan picked up the phone, preparing for what would undoubtedly be another uncomfortable conversation. "Jonathan," Mark's voice came through the phone, cold and direct. "I need results. I'm losing patience here." Jonathan's heart raced, but he refused to show weakness. "I'll have the answers you need, Mark. We're close." The truth was he wasn't close. And Mark knew it. Jonathan ended the call with mock and sat back in his chair, rubbing his face. He had never felt more cornered in his life. He turned to Claire Simmons, 32, who stood at the door of his office, watching him carefully. "I don't know how much longer we can keep this up," he said, his voice shaking slightly. Claire stepped forward, her face filled with concern, but also a quiet determination. "You've come this far, Jonathan. You can't let it go now." She was right, but Jonathan couldn't shake the feeling that he was running out of time. "What do you suggest?" he asked, feeling helpless. Claire took a deep breath and looked out of the window for a moment, contemplating. "We need to secure the new investment, and we need to move fast before Mark pulls out completely." Jonathan nodded, but deep down, he knew that even if they got the money, it wouldn't solve everything. The company was on the edge, and no amount of money could change the fact that they were losing trust, and quickly. Claire and Jonathan walked into the meeting room, their steps heavy with the weight of what was about to happen. Across from them sat Anna Ford, 35, their most skeptical team member. Anna had always been cautious, and now her doubts were more apparent than ever. "This plan doesn't make sense, Jonathan," Anna said bluntly. "You're gambling everything on a risky investment that's not even guaranteed. How do you expect to pull this off?" Jonathan stood firm, trying to suppress his rising frustration. "I don't have a choice, Anna. We either take this risk or lose everything. There's no middle ground anymore." Anna crossed her arms, her face etched with skepticism. "And what if it doesn't work? What's plan B?" Jonathan's jaw tightened. "There is no plan B." The weight of his words hung in the air, and for a moment there was silence. Anna's gaze softened, but she remained unconvinced. "You're pushing us all too hard, Jonathan," she said quietly. "And you're running out of time." The meeting broke up in tense silence. Jonathan and Claire sat across from each other in the office, the weight of the decision still hanging in the air. "Anna doesn't trust me," Jonathan muttered, his hands gripping the edge of the desk. "She's right to question us, Jonathan," Claire replied, her voice calm but firm. "But we don't have the luxury of time to second-guess ourselves. If we pull out now, there's no coming back." Jonathan nodded, but a flicker of doubt lingered in his chest. What if Claire was wrong? What if this wasn't the answer? "We're on the edge, Claire," Jonathan said softly, almost to himself. "One misstep, and we lose everything." Claire stood up, walking to the window. "Then we make sure we don't misstep. We've come too far to stop now." Her words, though reassuring, couldn't quiet the storm brewing in Jonathan's mind. It was a fight for survival, but at what cost? The next few days were a blur. Jonathan threw himself into the project, meeting with potential investors, and making countless phone calls. But as the clock ticked down, the reality of the situation became clearer. They were running out of time, and their options were dwindling. The breakthrough came unexpectedly, late one night. A new investor, Eva Johnson, made contact offering to help, but with conditions. They would need to cut down on their staff and restructure the entire business. Jonathan hesitated. The idea of cutting jobs, of destroying the culture they had built, felt like a betrayal. But without the investors' help, they would be finished. He met with Claire to discuss it, and though she was hesitant, she knew the decision had to be made. "It's the only chance we have left," she said, her voice resolute. Jonathan sighed, staring at the document before him. It was a bitter pill to swallow, but there was no other choice. Jonathan stood in front of the boardroom table, staring at the faces around him, his mind racing. Eva Johnson had just laid out a potential deal that could save the company. But it came at a high cost. "If we move forward with this," Jonathan said, looking each person in the eye, "we're making a commitment to overhaul everything. Every single thing we've built." Claire Simmons stood at his side, her usual calm demeanor replaced by an unmistakable tension. "We need a commitment, Jonathan," Eva replied, her voice firm. "Either you go all in or we pull out." Jonathan could feel the weight of the decision settling in his chest. His hand rested on the table as he leaned forward, looking at Anna Ford, 35, across from him. She had been vocal about the risk before. "I'm not ready to sacrifice everything for one shot," Anna said, her voice low but resolute. Jonathan took a deep breath. The truth was, he had no other choice. "Then it's settled," he said quietly. "We'll do it, but we all need to be in this together." The room fell silent, the enormity of their choice hanging in the air. The boardroom meeting ended, but the tension between Jonathan and Anna Ford remained. They walked together down the hallway, the air thick with unspoken words. "You're making a mistake," Anna said, her voice low but sharp. "Do you really think this risky deal is going to save us?" Jonathan's hand was tight around the leather strap of his briefcase, frustration building. "We don't have a choice, Anna," he replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "The company is sinking, and if we don't act now, it's over." Anna stopped walking and turned to face him. "You've always been about the big win, Jonathan, but sometimes it's not worth the risk. You need to think about the long-term consequences." Jonathan paused, looking at her. He understood her concerns, but the fear of failure weighed too heavily on him. "I'm not thinking about the short term, Anna. I'm thinking about survival." Anna shook her head. "Then you're already lost," she muttered, walking away. Jonathan stood there, the finality of her words echoing in his mind. The decision to go forward with the deal had been made, but the aftermath was far from smooth. The first round of restructuring hit the company hard. Employees were laid off, and morale plummeted. Jonathan sat at his desk, staring at a letter from Eva Johnson confirming the next phase of the deal. The offer was significant, but the consequences were impossible to ignore. Claire Simmons entered the office, her face a mixture of concern and resignation. "The fallout from this is worse than we expected," she said, sitting down across from Jonathan. Jonathan didn't look up, his gaze fixed on the letter. "I know," he said quietly. "But what other choice do we have?" Claire placed a hand on the desk, her fingers grazing the paper. "There's always a choice," she replied, her voice steady but laced with sadness. Jonathan ran a hand through his hair. "Not this time, Claire. Not this time." The silence between them was deafening, as they both realized the magnitude of their actions. The phone call from Mark Richards came through the following day. Jonathan stared at the screen for a moment, unsure if he was ready to face the consequences of the choices he had made. He answered the call, and Mark's voice came through the phone, sharp and cold. "Jonathan, I've been hearing things," Mark said, his tone accusing. "Your company is a mess right now. How do you expect me to keep funding this?" Jonathan leaned back in his chair, trying to steady his breathing. "Mark, I know it's been rough, but this deal is our shot at recovery. Is the only way forward." Mark's silence was telling. "You better have more than that, Jonathan," he finally replied. "I've been patient, but I'm running out of time." Jonathan's stomach tightened. He knew that Mark's patience was a luxury they could no longer afford. "We'll have the results soon, Mark," Jonathan said, trying to sound confident. "Just a little longer." After the call, Jonathan paced the office, the weight of everything pressing down on him. Claire Simmons had gone home for the day, but Jonathan couldn't sleep. He opened the window, hoping the cool night air would clear his mind. But all he could hear was the sound of the city, the hum of life going on around him, unaware of his struggles. The world felt so distant. His phone buzzed again. It was Anna Ford, her name flashing across the screen. Jonathan hesitated before answering. "Jonathan," Anna's voice was steady but cautious. "We need to talk." Jonathan's heart sank. "What's it about?" he asked. The deal. It's falling apart. We're being exposed to more risks than we anticipated. You need to take action now. Jonathan looked out the window, his hand tightening on the phone. I know, he said softly. I'm doing everything I can. But deep down, he knew that he was running out of time. Jonathan sat in his office, waiting for Mark Richards to arrive. He knew this meeting was make or break. The deal had to go through. There was no turning back. As the door opened, Mark stepped inside, his expression unreadable. Jonathan, Mark said curtly. You've had your time. I'm not here to waste it. Jonathan took a deep breath, gathering his thoughts. Mark, I have a proposal that will change everything. You've been looking for growth. This is how we achieve it. Mark raised an eyebrow, skeptical. Go on, he said, crossing his arms. Jonathan opened his briefcase, pulling out a set of charts. This investment will put us on a path to profitability, but it's going to require trust. Are you willing to take a risk? The tension in the room was palpable. Mark stared at Jonathan for a long moment before responding. The meeting continued, and Eva Johnson, 50, joined the conversation via video call. She appeared calm but focused, her demeanor one of someone who had seen it all. Mark, she said, if we don't act now, we lose the opportunity forever. You'll never find a better chance. Mark glanced at Jonathan, his mind clearly racing. I'm not convinced, he said finally. Jonathan looked at him unwavering. You've seen the numbers, Mark. This is the best shot we have. Mark was silent for a long moment, clearly weighing his options. Finally, he nodded slowly. I'll take the risk, but you'd better deliver, Jonathan. I'm putting my trust in you. Jonathan's heart raced, but he kept his face steady. This was the break he had been waiting for. With the deal now approved, Jonathan walked into the company's headquarters to address the team. Claire Simmons, 32, was there, standing at the front, her expression one of cautious optimism. This is it, Jonathan said, looking at his team. We've just secured the future of this company. The next step is up to all of us. The room filled with a mix of cheers and nervous glances. Anna Ford, 35, was at the back, still unsure. This is only the beginning, Jonathan continued. We have to work harder than ever before. Claire smiled, proud but exhausted. The entire room felt a new sense of purpose. They had come through the storm, but there was still a long way to go. Days passed, and the hard work began. Jonathan spent countless hours at his desk, checking and rechecking every decision. Claire Simmons would often check in with him, but even her reassuring words couldn't ease the weight on his shoulders. One night, she stood by his desk, watching him. You've done everything you can, Jonathan, she said softly. Jonathan didn't look up from the papers in front of him. Not yet. There's still too much to do. He glanced up at her, his eyes tired but resolute. I've put everything into this company. I can't fail now. Claire sighed, her expression one of both concern and admiration. I know, but remember, you're not alone in this. Jonathan nodded, but the feeling of responsibility never left him. The breakthrough finally came after weeks of relentless work. Jonathan stood before his team once again, this time in the same conference room. The numbers were up. The deal was paying off. We did it, Jonathan said, his voice filled with a sense of pride and relief. Claire Simmons smiled, her eyes filled with admiration. Anna Ford, 35, finally seemed to believe in the process. This isn't just me, Jonathan continued. This is all of us. There was a moment of collective silence before the room erupted in cheers. For the first time in a long time, Jonathan felt like he had truly led his team to victory. The journey had been long, but the future was now full of possibility. Jonathan, 40, stood outside the conference room, his heart racing. Today was the day he would present his final proposal to the board and secure the future of the company. Claire Simmons, 32, walked up beside him, her expression calm yet filled with the same tension. Are you ready? She asked quietly. Jonathan nodded, his thoughts racing. I have to be, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Anna Ford, 35, was already inside, waiting. Jonathan knew that she had been skeptical, but he hoped this would be the turning point. The door opened, and he walked in. Every pair of eyes was on him. Jonathan stood tall, despite the weight of the moment. "This is our chance," he said, meeting the gazes of his team and the board members. "I believe this is the path forward, and I believe in this company." The room fell silent as Jonathan laid out his plan. Inside the conference room, Jonathan, 40, stood before the board, the weight of every decision they had made hanging in the balance. Eva Johnson, 50, sat at the head of the table, her eyes sharp. "This proposal is bold, Jonathan," she said, her voice measured. Jonathan cleared his throat. "It's the only choice we have. Our competitors are already ahead of us. If we don't act now, we'll fall behind." Mark Richards, 45, was sitting at the far end, his gaze fixed on Jonathan. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, his voice skeptical. Jonathan locked eyes with him. "I'm sure. I've put everything into this company. This is our future." There was a moment of silence before Eva nodded slowly. "Then we'll give you the green light. But you better deliver, Jonathan." The tension eased slightly, as Jonathan allowed himself a small, relieved smile. After the meeting, Jonathan stepped out of the conference room, a mixture of relief and uncertainty washing over him. He met Claire Simmons, 32, in the hallway. "It's done," Jonathan said, his voice full of emotion. "We have the approval." Claire smiled, her eyes filled with pride. "You did it, Jonathan. You really did it." But Jonathan couldn't shake the feeling of what lay ahead. "This is just the beginning, Claire. We have a long road ahead of us." Claire nodded, understanding the weight of his words. As they walked down the hallway, the reality of their success began to sink in. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, it felt like a future worth fighting for. The days following the approval were filled with frantic activity. Jonathan, 40, found himself constantly at the office, overseeing every detail. One evening, as the sun began to set, Eva Johnson, 50, walked into his office. "You're working yourself to the bone, Jonathan," she said, her tone a mix of concern and admiration. Jonathan didn't look up. "I have to. We can't afford any mistakes." Eva sat down across from him. "You've done everything you can. Trust your team. Trust yourself." Jonathan paused, looking up at her. "I just don't want to fail. Not now." Eva smiled. "Failure is part of the journey. What matters is how you rise from it." Jonathan nodded, his mind at ease for just a moment. He realized she was right. He had done his best, and now it was time to trust the process. Weeks later, Jonathan stood at the front of a newly renovated office space, looking out over the bustling city. Claire Simmons, 32, stood beside him, her expression filled with pride. "You did it, Jonathan. This is just the beginning." Jonathan nodded, his eyes on the horizon. "It's more than that. It's about what we've built, and how we're going to keep building it. We fought for this." Claire smiled. "And you didn't give up." Jonathan looked at her, his face full of resolve. Giving up was never an option. The future was uncertain, but for the first time, Jonathan felt ready to face it. With his team behind him, he knew they would succeed. Jonathan sat at his desk, staring at the urgent email from Eva Johnson, 50. The subject line read, "Immediate action needed." The deal with their new investor had hit a snag. More specifically, a major financial backer had pulled out unexpectedly. The feeling of the ground slipping beneath him was all too familiar. He called Claire Simmons, 32, immediately. "Claire, this isn't good. We need to figure out how to handle this before it spirals." Claire arrived in his office, her face serious. "We've been here before, Jonathan. We'll fix this, but we need a plan, and fast." Jonathan looked at her, his mind racing with options. "I'll call Mark Richards, but I have a bad feeling this could escalate into something worse." The weight of the situation pressed heavily on him. They couldn't afford another setback, but they were about to face an even bigger challenge. Jonathan dialed Mark Richards, 45, and waited. Mark answered quickly. Jonathan, this isn't the news I wanted to hear today. Mark's voice was sharp. We've lost a major backer, and now this new risk. Jonathan felt his pulse quicken. I know it's bad, Mark, but we can't let this derail us. We need your help more than ever. Mark hesitated. I'll consider it, but you need to move quickly. You don't have much time. Jonathan ended the call and slumped into his chair. His mind clouded with doubt. He turned to Claire, who had been watching him quietly. Well, I've just been thrown back into the fire, haven't we? Claire nodded, but her expression was resolute. We'll handle it, Jonathan. We've faced worse. Eva Johnson's call came next. Jonathan, she said, her tone direct. This has escalated faster than we expected. You need a backup plan, and you need it now. Jonathan stared at the ceiling, fighting back frustration. I don't have time for a plan B, Eva. I need to fix this today. Eva paused. Then start by looking at the smaller investments. What can be restructured? You need liquidity fast. Jonathan's mind began to turn the wheels of action. I'll start with our smaller ventures. But I need everyone on board with this. We can't afford dissent. Eva's voice softened. Do what you need to, Jonathan. Just make sure it's the right move. Jonathan looked at Claire after ending the call. We need to mobilize the team, Claire. This is all we have left. The next morning, Jonathan stood before his team. Anna Ford, 35, and the others sat around the table, waiting for him to speak. We've been hit with a major setback, Jonathan said, looking around the room. But we're not backing down. Anna spoke up, her voice skeptical. We're scrambling, Jonathan. Are you sure about this? Jonathan met her gaze. Yes, I'm sure. This company is bigger than anyone's setback. We'll restructure what we need to, but we'll come out stronger. The room fell silent, each team member digesting his words. Claire Simmons, 32, nodded. We'll get through this, together. The resolve in her voice seemed to settle the room, and for the first time in days, Jonathan felt a renewed sense of hope. They were on the edge, but they could still turn things around. Days passed in a blur of negotiations and late-night meetings. Jonathan felt the pressure mounting, but his resolve never wavered. The phone rang late one evening. It was Mark Richards. Jonathan, Mark's voice was more sincere now. I've been thinking. I'm in. Let's make this work. Jonathan's heart lifted. Thank you, Mark. You won't regret this. As the deal began to solidify, Jonathan turned to Claire Simmons, 32, who had been by his side through it all. We're not out of the woods yet, Jonathan said, but this is the break we needed. Claire smiled, her eyes filled with pride. You did it, Jonathan. You pulled us back from the edge. Jonathan smiled faintly, looking out over the city. We did it, he said softly. Together. Jonathan, 40, faces the board, making his final pitch for the company's future. Claire Simmons, 32, offers quiet support as Mark Richards, 45, listens intently. Jonathan's voice shakes as he declares, "This is our only chance." The room is tense as he waits for their response. Eva Johnson, 50, asks Jonathan to prove his commitment. Mark questions his ability to deliver. Jonathan responds firmly, "I have no other option. This is our future." Silence fills the room until Eva gives the go-ahead, but with conditions. Jonathan's relief is palpable. After approval, Jonathan breathes a sigh of relief, but Eva Johnson reminds him, "You must deliver." Jonathan, now focused, assures her, "I won't let you down." The pressure is high, but Jonathan is ready to face the challenges ahead. Jonathan works tirelessly, ensuring the company is on track. Claire Simmons shares the good news. We're seeing results. Eva Johnson congratulates him. Jonathan finally feels peace, knowing the hard work is paying off. Months later, Jonathan stands at the top of a building, reflecting on their success. We made it, he says to Claire Simmons, 32, who smiles in quiet pride. The sun sets over the city, symbolizing a new beginning for Jonathan and his team.